Is BBC Radio 5 Live.
It is, it's 9 o'clock. Nicky Campbell, your call. Is your community integrated? Does it matter? Or is it segregated? This is what Bradford MP Jerry Sutcliffe told us a few minutes ago.
Britain's got a proud record of being multinational. We've been, all around the world in terms of the Empire days. We have an influence all around the world. So I think it's important that we're able to live together here in the UK.
Community Secretary Eric Pickles said this month that those who advocate separate lives are wrong. It's time to concentrate on the things that unite the British people. Well, what do you think? How far should different cultures go to interact? Is your community integrated? Does it matter if it isn't? We can all just get on with our lives. What's the problem? 0500 909 693. Text 85058. You are with 5 Live from the BBC. There seems to be a speech about this every week from a major figure. There is, whether it be, Trevor Phillips, whether it be a government minister, Eric Pickles recently, David Cameron, people from all the mainstream political parties talking about multiculturalism, talking about integration. We asked this morning, do we need to be more integrated, or is it fine to be segregated, to do our own thing in our own communities? Talking about your community, what is your community like? Is it one community or many little different ones? Doing their own thing and turning their backs on each other. 0500 909 693, and you can text as well, 85058. The Community Secretary Eric Pickles was speaking about this recently. He vowed to stand up for mainstream values. He said a few people, a handful of activists, have insisted it isn't enough simply to celebrate the beliefs of minority communities. They want to disown the traditions and heritage of the majority, including the Christian faith and the English language. He's been speaking about that. He's been speaking about his perception of the failure of multiculturalism. Well, this entirely depends upon your definition of multiculturalism, doesn't it? Do you remember John Cleese's comments quite recently? I've dug those up for you. He was asked what he thought about British culture and the recent London riots during an interview on a television show in Australia, where he was on a stand-up tour. He said, I'm not sure what's going on in Britain, or let me say this, I don't know what's going on in London, because London is no longer an English city. That's how we got the Olympics. They said we were the most cosmopolitan city on earth, but it doesn't feel English. I had a Californian friend come over 2 months ago, walk down the King's Road and say, where are all the English people? I mean, I love having different cultures around, but when the parent culture kind of dissipates, you're left thinking, well, what's going on? Comments there from John Cleese. Let's speak to Councillor Suklin Mahmood in Hertfordshire. Good morning.
Good morning, Nicky.
Good morning. Good to have you on. And also Gerard Batten joins us, who's a UKIP MEP. Hello, Gerard Batten. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Good morning, Nicky.
Nice to talk to you. And Ian Greenwood. Now, Ian is a Labour leader of Bradford City Council. Ian, what do you make of this and the impetus that so many politicians and the effort so many politicians are making to have us integrate?
I think that any society ought to be based on respect for people and that respect for each other's ways of life. We do not have a situation where everybody lives the same or has the same beliefs, and therefore that respect is important. But also we've got to be in a situation where we can have mature dialogue about parts of other people's cultures that feel that feel unpleasant or threatening in some way.
Such as what feels unpleasant and threatening about other people?
I don't want to specify.
Well, this is what this is all about.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, you've just said we need to have a mature dialogue about aspects of other people's cultures, and then you'd say you don't want to talk about it.
Some people have a culture where people don't drink, and therefore that's. And yet, in other cultures, the social life is surrounded, is centred on alcohol in many ways, and that is troubling to some people. Certain parts of the if you like, the indigenous culture would be troubling to somebody who has a different background, and what we ought to have is a language that allows us to explore those without descending into what I would call stereotyping people. So we need to understand each other, make allowances for each other, perhaps challenge each other without descending into prejudice.
Gerard Batten.
Well, I think that my view, and I think my party's view, would be that private multiculturalism, when people enjoy their own customs and their own religions, etc., is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when culturalism spills over into the public sphere. There are two bedrocks of a nation state, and it's language and law. If people don't speak the same language and obey the same laws, then it's impossible to keep together a country as a coherent whole. And this is, I think, the road that we're moving down now, where we have many, many people, because we brought immigrants in such overwhelming numbers over the last few decades, that people don't see any reason to learn English or to absorb. And of course now we have people calling for Sharia law. It's recognised in some tribunals. And why should they? They're big enough and strong enough in places in the UK where they think, well, why should we absorb? And I think that's the massive problem. It isn't about people's customs. And, you know, we're talking here about the symptoms, which are not a problem, which is whether people drink or have weddings in a certain way or don't. It's about whether they obey the same laws, speak the same language, and identify with the same public institutions.
Isn't that the case, Simon, in Manchester?
Hi, good morning. I think there's some really good points being raised. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I'm a salesman. That's what I do for a living. And I've travelled all across the UK and got to see all sorts. I had actually a very interesting experience in Bradford, whereby I was supplying an optician's there, and the next time I went to see him, he told me that he couldn't stock the frames that I supplied him anymore because he was told by the younger elements of the community there, seeing it was a Jewish-owned company, he couldn't stock those items, and if he did, there'd be repercussions. That shook me to the core. I mean, I couldn't believe that in England, you know, in today's day and age, there's still stuff like that going on. So I think, again, I live in quite...
What did you say to him? What did you say, if I may?
Well, my initial reaction to him, I asked him if he'd contacted the police, because he told me that he'd been threatened and his car had actually been damaged as a warning. So I said, well, did you contact the police? He said, yes. I said, well, what happened? He goes, the Bobby came around, asked him how much of the stock that he carried was actually from you, which was perhaps sort of one tray's worth on the wall. So the guy said to him, well, you know what, if that's the case, is it really worth it? Is it worth the hassle?
I mean, I've got to say, I wish you'd have contacted me, because I would have done something about it, because that's totally unacceptable, and the vast majority of people in Bradford would think of it as totally unacceptable. We have a small but valued Jewish community in Bradford that is part of the community at large.
Yeah. I mean, I went further and I asked him whether, you know, he'd spoken to any of the Ummans there, anything like that. And he said to me, no, he says, but they know it goes on, but it's swept under the carpet. But again, I mean, I live in a very, very tight-knit Jewish community in Manchester.
What does that mean, tight-knit Jewish community?
That means that within a few streets, there's hardly any non-Jewish people living there. Because we need our kosher shops, we need our synagogues, we tend to live very, very closely together. For example, on the Sabbath, Orthodox Jews don't drive, so you've got to be...
Are you an Orthodox Jew, Simon?
Yes, I am.
Right.
You've got to be able to walk to the synagogue on the Sabbath, for example, right? You cannot drive. So, again, when I say tight-knit, I mean within a small area, very, very concentrated amount of Jewish people living there. But, you know, I've been in business for years, and there's never been an issue of not buying or not being supplied by a company that, you know, isn't of the same religion or the same colour and that. And yet, I had this experience in Bradford, which, you know...
Something about it. I mean, the reality is that we should have been in a situation to know that and to challenge it. And if we don't challenge a behaviour like that, which is a tiny minority, then what we're doing is effectively accepting it. And it's totally unacceptable in Bradford to adopt a view like that. And we should and would do something about it. And still will if you give us the details.
Well, okay. We'll organise that if you want them. But it's fascinating hearing from people all over the United Kingdom about their own communities, whether they feel that they are integrated or segregated, people living in their own kind of silos. Let's hear, stay there. Let's hear from, let me see now, John in Peterborough. Good morning, John. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Nicky. Yeah, I've obviously grown up in Peterborough. I've been here since I was 4. It seems to have changed, you know. People still think the same, but they're not able to say what they think. My son's 20, and my fear last night, I was thinking about it, It's that he's going to grow up and obviously meet someone and have kids himself and have to go through it all again.
Go through what? Go through what all?
Sorry?
Go through what? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about you. So go through what?
Oh, right, I see. Yeah. Yeah. In the 70s, people would shout racial abuse. People would shout racial abuse in the streets. You know, whereas they're not so much able to do that now.
Are you black?
Sorry?
Are you black?
Yeah, sorry, Nicky, I didn't mention that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you feel they're still thinking it?
Yes, yeah, they are, yeah, definitely, yeah. I think most cities have a problem with it, certainly in Peterborough, you know. Late at night, if you're in the wrong areas, you'll get abuse. Definitely.
Councillor Suckling, I'll come back to you. I think you've got your radio on in the background, which might be putting you off a bit. But you made your point, and I will come back. Councillor,
I'll try and find somewhere quiet.
All right. Councillor Mahmood in Hertfordshire. What's your community like?
I think. Hi, Nicky. I live in Hemel Hempstead, and the community here. I'm also the only Asian councillor in the council. And the community here, I feel, is well integrated. And the reason it's well integrated is I, as a community leader, actually make that effort to facilitate the integration through community events, through awareness. A lot of the time, a lot of this anti-integration sort of views come across because people don't know. And I have been to meetings where people with totally opposing views, after the chat and the talk and the discussion, they say, well, you're different. And I say to them, no, I'm not. I'm integrating, and now you've heard me, you feel I'm different. I'm no different to anybody else. So a lot of it, I think in Hemel Hempstead, we are quite lucky. We're very close to Luton, which gets a lot of press, and I've had business in Luton myself. And I think a lot of the time, yes, there is elements in every society. We get criminal elements, we get extremist elements in all societies. And the moral compass is constantly changing. We as a society are evolving. What was acceptable 20 years ago probably isn't now. So I think there's a constant going on. So for me, I think certainly in the community here and in Burton-on-Trent, where I was brought up, I've always been an advocate for integration, and for me, it's brought me opportunities in terms of jobs. Since the age of 16, I've not had a day when I was unemployed. So I've been, and that goes for the whole of my family.
It's interesting, yes. And Ian Greenwood, given
gives you opportunities.
Yeah, Ian Greenwood, given the levels of immigration we've had in recent years, is it a tribute to this country just how integrated we are?
Yeah.
The vast majority of ordinary people treat their fellow citizens of all cultures with respect. I think one of the real issues is there's a sort of triangle of extremism which has calm debate in Britain. We've got the far-right nutcases, we've got the far-left nutcases, and we've got religious extremists from more than one religion, I have to say. And the vast majority of us sit in the middle of that and think it's all nonsense, but in some ways not wanting to pander to those extremist views as limited debate, and I think that that's a difficult thing. And I think as an adult community, what we've got to do is to have a way of talking to each other about difference that doesn't foster or isn't seen to foster extremism, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do.
Jerry Batten, is there an overarching British culture that you can distill?
Well, I think I'm always dubious about talking about values and stuff, because even people amongst the same race and culture have different values. I think this is why I think that these private things are best left private. But what we have to do is to say if you live in a country, then you have to accept its legal system, you have to speak the language, and we want some commitment to its the political system, as imperfect as it may be, and that's the way to do something. We live in a democracy. And I think that the problem that we've had for the last 40 years is just the sheer scale of immigration, which isn't abating, by the way. We're still bringing in 1 million new people every 4 years. We need to build a city the size of Birmingham to accommodate them. Many of those people do not feel that they particularly have to integrate or adapt to us. I'm an MEP for London, and when I won my seat in 2004, the returning officer afterwards, we were having a chat, and I overheard him say to somebody, London is just an international city that happens to be in England.
So do you agree with John?
You're actually right.
Do you agree with John?
You're actually right. It is now.
Do you agree with John Cleese?
Yeah, I think so.
But you said something interesting there. You said I don't know if it was betraying any kind of a prejudice. Some people might think so. Some people might think not. When you said even people of the same race have different values, you said just a moment ago.
You don't find British people.
As if they wouldn't.
Find white English people who don't all believe in the same thing have the same value. So I'm always dubious about saying that there are British values or something. I think this is why this whole debate has to be about what is actually being done on the official level. And this is, I say, what I think is so dangerous is where people actually want to have different systems of law, be treated in a different way. And I don't think we have a way of debating about this, because if anybody actually does try to say anything, I mean, I'm in a privileged position. I'm an elected person.
What are people afraid of saying?
Well, I mean, take the case last week of the chap in the airport, and I can't remember his name, but he devised some children's TV series or something years ago, and he was at the airport, and a lady went through wearing a burqa, and he said to the people behind who were checking the security, if I had my face covered up, I wouldn't have to bother with this, would I? It was some kind of innocent remark, joke. It wasn't meant to be offensive in any way. And they forced him to apologise. They weren't going to let him through. And I thought, come on, I've been in an airport where in Brussels, for example, coming back when I used to fly, and you see ladies in burqas who just walk through. How can you check somebody's passport if you can't see their face? And this is what I think. This is the point. I think we're having different systems for dealing with
who's that? Who's coming in on that? Who is that? Go on, Ian.
All around the world, so I think it's important that we're able to live together here in the UK.
Community Secretary Eric Pickles said this month that those who advocate separate lives are wrong. It's time to concentrate on the things that unite the British people. What do you think? How far should different cultures go to interact? Is your community integrated? Does it matter if it isn't? We can all just get on with our lives. What's the problem? 0500 909 69. Talking about your community, what is your community like? Is it one community or many little different ones? Doing their own thing and turning their backs on each other. 0500 909 693, and you can text as well, 85058. The Community Secretary Eric Pickles was speaking about this recently. He vowed to stand up for mainstream values. He said a handful of activists have insisted it isn't enough simply to celebrate.
Is BBC Radio 5 Live.
It is, it's 9 o'clock. Nicky Campbell, your call. Is your community integrated? Does it matter? Or is it segregated? This is what Bradford MP Jerry Sutcliffe told us a few minutes ago.
Britain's got a proud record of being multinational. We've been, all around the world in terms of the Empire days. We have an influence around.
Text 85058. You are with 5 Live from the BBC. There seems to be a speech about this every week from a major figure. There is, whether it be, Trevor Phillips, whether it be a government minister, Eric Pickles recently, David Cameron, people from all the mainstream political parties talking about multiculturalism, talking about integration. We asked this morning, do we need to be more integrated, or is it fine to be segregated, to do our own thing in our own communities, celebrate the beliefs of minority communities? They want to disown the traditions and heritage of the majority, including the Christian faith and the English language. He's been speaking about that. He's been speaking about his perception of the failure of multiculturalism. Well, this entirely depends upon your definition of multiculturalism, doesn't it? Do you remember John Cleese's comments quite recently?